We're doing a job today on Holy Island, an island just off the coast of Northumberland, a Mariner F15 EFI. But we're just having to wait for the tide to recede enough to cross. I think that's just about it, they're done now. So we'll proceed across and get on with the engine service. So we're on the island now, and I've got the Mariner F15 EFI out. And what I've done is I've just went ahead and taken the side cover off. It's a 10mm metric. There's a couple of bolts there on each side, and the whole side comes off to give you easy access to the rest of the engine. So that's just the seal for the cowling there, and we've got access now to the oil filter, the fuel filter, and both spark plugs. So the first job on this Mariner is we're going to look at the fuel filter here. Now it's got a little strainer inside, and you notice it's got a red ring and a little petcock on the bottom. Now this is to capture any water that might be in the fuel. If you do get water in, this red ring will rise. Now on this one there isn't an alarm or anything like that, so it's purely a visual indication. But the method of draining it is obviously just to open the petcock there, and there's a little sort of end on, so you could put a little hose on if you wanted. But as you can see with this one, there is no water in there at all. And with the strainer, it's just a case of we'll take it off and then we'll clean it out with some brake cleaner. Now for the removal, unlike most engines, it's not cable tied on or bolted on. It's a rubber housing that's just push fit. So it's just a case of pulling both sides off, just like that, and then it's a screw fit for this canister here. You can drain it out beforehand, but as you can see with the level, it's halfway down there, so we're just going to leave it in there, and we'll unscrew this and remove the insert. So that's it removed now. I've taken the rubber mount off, and here we go, there's the fuel filter there. So it's just a case of, we can pull that out, we can have a look inside. Now that looks excellent condition, there's no contaminants or material in there at all. Same goes for the fuel filter, we can hold it up and look inside. Can't see anything at all in there either, so we'll just dispose of the contents of that, hit it with the brake cleaner, and then we'll put it back together. Now reassembly, straightforward, just like the disassembly, but when you take it out, as you can see inside, you've got something like a proud ring. That's where the filter sits, and then the case sits on this thread on the outside. Now normally I'd expect to get an O-ring, replacement O-ring for this, but in the service kit that comes with it, it doesn't come with an O-ring, so I'm not sure why that's the case, but that's what the kit has, or hasn't in this case. But I suppose that for future reference, order an O-ring for the fuel filter separately. And again, for the rubber mount, you can see there's a indent there for alignment, and that lines up with a similar notch on the fuel filter housing. So our next task is this oil filter. We're going to remove this. You can see the last time it was done was 2022, so about 2 years ago now. It's April 2024 at the moment, so 2 years, not since it's had a service, but at least since this has been changed. I'm not sure the history in this engine. So this is a Quicksilver filter. There is a filter tool to remove this. I think I've got one, and we'll remove that. Like I mentioned, there is a tool to remove it. I have the tool here, and that just slips over the oil filter. As you can see, it's not smooth all the way around, it's got indentations, and that lines up almost like a spline onto there. And then it's just a case of putting your socket on, left hand thread to remove. And one additional note is there is a hose here which is connected into this housing. It's stored up over the top here on some little arm just on there, just pushed on. So I've removed that, so any leakage from the housing here should run down here, and we'll collect it in a little tub. So I'll just make a correction because I wasn't entirely sure how this hose works here. You see it comes around, I pulled this sort of ECU off, and there's the small hole. So it's possible that you do this, I'm not 100% sure here, with the engine lying down so the oil will drain out of there. I'm not sure. The book wasn't very clear on what this was for. It just said remove the oil drain hose, which I assumed was, this was sort of like a save-all, and the hose ran down. It would literally, all the excess would drain out of this hose, but it hasn't. It's just ran down there. There's not much that comes out, but we've just got some brake cleaner now to clean this all up. So with the filter removed and the housing cleaned up, we're just going to look at the face where the filter sits and look for any blemishes. There shouldn't be any. Obviously you don't want to over tighten an oil filter or anything like that. The instructions are on the spin-on can as to how to install one. We'll go ahead now and put the new one on. It goes on dry, you can't pre-fill them. We'll just put a little bit of oil around the seal, just so it doesn't bind up on this face. There we go. I put some oil on the seal there, and now it's just a case of spinning this can on until it seats. And then normally it's a quarter turn. Obviously we never use tools to put these on unless it states so. Everything's by hand, otherwise you'll never get them off again. So that's it for the oil filter. Now we will drain the oil and refill with clean engine oil. So the next step is we're going to do the oil. So I've turned the engine round, and down here is the sump plug. So we'll remove that and the engine oil will drain out. So just crack the plug there, and we'll slowly remove it. There's a washer behind there, and there we go, the oil's coming out. Quite clean, don't think it's got much use on it. We're just checking the quality as well. It's clean, there's no sign of water ingress or contamination at the moment. So these engines don't hold much oil. We've got an oil specification chart there, which is 10W30 or 25W40 depending on the temperature, and the sump holds 1 litre. A little bit of good information here. We've got some specs for the engine, lubrication points, telling you how often to do servicing. Some quite handy information there. Not many engines have that, especially the older ones. So most of the oil's out. We've just got the last bit. I've cleaned up the sump plug, and we've got a new washer as well, which comes in the kit. So that's it all back together. Just got the oil put back in now, and I've cleaned the whole area with brake cleaner, because if we get any leaks it'll be a lot more apparent than if we've got old oil dripping down, and once it goes in the water we don't want any oil sheens in that for the environment. So we've cleaned it up, and I'll give it a wipe with a cloth. So we're going to fill the engine up with oil now. The specification says 1 litre. I've got a jug which has an increment up to a litre there. It actually holds 2, and a funnel. The filler on this Mariner is at this end of the engine here at the back, where we've got a yellow cap, and we've also got a dipstick. So we'll remove the cap, put 1 litre in, and then we'll check it. Obviously the oil filter is empty, so we might put a little bit more in. Normally you do with an oil filter change as well. So I've just put the oil in. It says 1 litre on the side there, but we'll put a little bit more in because we've done the filter as well, so probably about 1100 ml. And now we'll move on to the spark plugs. So again, I'm going to turn the engine round, so we've got the other side, and we'll do the spark plugs. There's 2 on this engine, twin cylinder, and the gap there is 0.9mm. So on this engine we have 2 spark plugs, twin cylinder, and these are DCPR6E by NGK, gap to 0.9. Now I've got the gauge there. I've got a 0.8 and a 0.1, which gives us 0.9. So we'll pre-gap them, and they're good to go on. So we'll remove the 2 that are on there now, and we'll check the condition. I might even check the gap just to see if they're gapped correctly the first time, and we'll install these 2 new ones. So we're going to remove these 2 spark plugs now. We've got a coil here. We follow the leads round, and we can see the top cylinder and the bottom cylinder in there. Obviously make sure that when you take the HT lead off you remember which one it goes to. So on this one it's pretty simple. The top cylinder is the top HT lead and the bottom cylinder is the lower one, so we can't really get mixed up there. So I've just removed both HT leads there and have exposed top and bottom cylinder. So we'll get the spark plug tool on there now and we'll remove both of them. So I've removed both spark plugs there, and they're both looking in good condition. The gap's correct, 0.9. I think this engine's had very light hours in the 2 years since its last service. So one thing I always like to do when we've got both spark plugs out is run a compression test. So I've got a compression tester here, and we've put it into the spark plug hole, left the other one out as well, remove the kill cord so we don't get any spark generated, and then we'll just pull the engine a couple of times and see what pressure we get. We're looking for anything in the green there, which is about 125 psi. So I just ran the compression test there, 100 on the top and 110 on the bottom, which is in the 10%, which is what I like to see. I'd like to see a little bit higher compression, but the engine's not been ran for a while, cylinder's probably dry, so once you get a bit of lubrication in there, you'll get a better seal. So not bad. I've definitely seen a lot worse. Now the compression test's done, we'll put both spark plugs in. These don't have to be indexed like an Evinrude. Let me just wind them in if they're gapped correctly, and then we'll reconnect the HT leads. One thing I'd like to mention when putting spark plugs in, I think it's a big no-no to use electric tools like a ratchet or something like that, electric ratchet or impact gun. Do it by hand. You'll never feel if it's cross-threaded or not, and they don't need much once they're seated. So I do them in by hand, start them off by hand, and then I'll get a ratchet on there and just give them like a quarter turn. Both plugs are in. Now just remembering that the upper HT lead goes onto the upper one, and you click it in, and the lower one onto the lower one, and then we'll refit the fuel filter onto its housing there. So there we have it. That's pretty much the top end done. We've done the oil filter, spark plugs and the fuel filter. So I'm happy with the top end, and what I'll do now is I'll put the side cover back on because I don't think we need access anymore inside. So I'll put the cover on and tidy the top up, and then we'll work our way down to the lower end. We'll do the gearbox. So these side covers, it literally is just a case of putting it into position, and you've got a few bolts here, all M10. There's 3 that are on the other side, and these 3 that are on this side. And the tip is, don't over tighten them because it is just plastic going into the bracket there. I mean, metal bolt going into a plastic housing. So just until they're snug, otherwise you'll crack it. So we're going to move on to the lower unit now, and on this Mariner it's held on with 4 bolts, 2 on this side, 2 on the other side on an equal mirror image, and the gear selector is held on this shaft here with a coupler. Now it's a 8mm jam nut. You've got a little nut on the bottom and a coupler. You get 2 spanners, 8mm, hold one, and this top one, as you can see, it's threaded. This bottom one can't go any further, so hold the bottom nut and undo this top one up the shaft until you see both shafts disconnected. You're then clear to take the remaining 4 bolts out, and the lower unit will drop with the water pickup tube, drive shaft and the gear selector. Okay, so you can see there I've wound this top one back, and that shaft is now free from the lower unit. Now a good tip is, if it's not coming off and it looks it has been off for a while, put a lot of some lubricant on there just to loosen the thread up a little bit. The last thing you want to do is be prevented from changing your impeller and removing your lower unit because of a chewed up gear shift coupler. So today, because we're on location and the engine's not on the back of a boat, I haven't got a stand for it. I've laid the engine down. Now it's important to note on 4 strokes that there is an indication on what side they should lie on, and I've just propped it up there. We've got good access to the leg, so we can remove the leg. Like I say, we've removed the jam nut coupler, so now we're clear to remove the lower unit, and then we'll put it into the stand there to do the rest of it. So the lower unit, we're just going to inspect the prop here, and you can see there is a bit of damage on the blades here. The lady did say that they had hit something, an oyster bed, so there's a bit of chewed up tips there on the aluminium prop. And the first thing to do is we're going to take this this split pin out of this castellated nut here, which retains the prop. So we'll pull that out and we can get the prop off just to make life a little bit easier. So we're going to remove the prop now. I've taken off the split pin, and we're going to wedge a bit of wood between the blade and the cavitation plate and get a 19mm socket on that castellated nut, and we'll take that off, and the washer, and then the prop will slide off. There we go, props off there. You can see the spline where the castellated nut was on the thread there, Inside there, that's where the seals are, and there's a bearing in there, and the prop is off. So that's the 4 bolts removed, one there, and the same on the other side, plus the jam nut there. So now the lower unit is ready to come off. So what we've done is, I've just used a soft face mallet there, and we've just tapped the cavitation plate, and we've now cracked the joint here. So now I'm happy that it's going to come off in one piece. You see there's a locating dowel, there's probably one on the other side as well. That just helps with alignment when we put it back together. One thing I did take off was the little nut, because I didn't have the clearance to this grommet. I suppose it probably will, you could probably force your way through it, but good tip is just to remove that nut before you pull it out. So there we go, lower unit is out and on the bench. Got a few tools there to help us. 10mm socket on all 4 of these bolts, and that'll take the impeller housing off. Other job we've got to do on here, we have the gear oil to do, pressure test the gearbox, and we've got an anode there as well. So we'll do all that and then put it all back together. Okay, I've removed all 4 bolts, and as you can see they're all the same size. And now we can just lift up the housing, and that's the impeller cup there, and we'll take this off. This is just the plastic housing, so there shouldn't be any wear items in there. And we've got the cup here and the impeller, which we're going to change, and we've got the woodruff key. So I'm just going to show you what we've got in this kit. We've got the impeller, gasket, a wear plate, and the cup. Like I mentioned, we've got a new woodruff key as well. So on first glance, there's not much wear on this plate. Obviously we're going to change it. And we've got the impeller there, and that's looking in good condition as well. So a little tip, what I like to do is when I take everything off, is I always put everything in sort of the orientation at which it came out, so you can't really go wrong when you put it back together. Because sometimes, although it looks straightforward, there are orientations and it will go in multiple directions or upside down. So always have it the right way around. So the next important job we've got to do is clean the mating surface. So I've got a scraper here, the razor blade in it. We're going to take off this old gasket. It shouldn't take too long. Bear in mind we do have 2 dowels here to be mindful of. So I've cleaned the face up there, and now it's time to put, first of all, the gasket on. So that goes over the drive shaft and aligns with the 2 dowel pins, and then we've got the wear plate which goes over as well, and again lines up with the 2 dowel pins onto there. Now I'm going to lubricate the drive shaft to put the impeller over with just a quick spray, just to aid with the installation. And then we'll slide the impeller down, and before we do that, just before we put it down, we'll put the drive cam in there, or the woodruff key. So I've slipped the impeller over, and as you can see in there, you've got the white woodruff key, which is in the recess of the drive shaft, and that lines in with a slot that's cut into the top of the impeller. And when we push that down, that is now the impeller locked to the shaft. So when the engine turns, that impeller will turn. If you didn't put the woodruff key in, that impeller would just sit still while this shaft was turning, and you wouldn't get any pumping, and your engine would overheat. So it's always imperative that when you do the impeller, that you change the woodruff key. Even if the original looks all right, you don't know, it could be bent over a little bit. So always change it as a set, like the impeller, the woodruff key, and all the gaskets. So again, we've got the pump case liner here. That's the original one, and this is the new one. The new one's only got 1 locating tab, because it'd be a modification from the original. What we'll do is we'll spray the inside of there with some lubricant, so the impeller will slip on nicely. And inside there, you've got the locating tab as to where that liner will sit. Sometimes it's easier to put that inside of there, which is what I might do, and then set it down as a unit, as opposed to trying to get that over and then that. We'll put that into there, install it in, and then we'll slide it down as one. So there you go, I've installed the liner into the pump housing. What I have done is I've sprayed the outside and the inside just for disassembly later on, it's not going to bind up. So now we'll slide it over the drive shaft and install it, and we'll put the 4 bolts back in, and we'll put a bit of grease on the bolts because they came out dry and we don't want them to bind up either. Now, as it's a new impeller, installation is fairly straightforward on this. I normally just, because I've lubricated it, a firm push down and it all just drops on in one. If you're reusing this, which I highly recommend that you don't, it always has to go, if this impeller comes out of the housing, always twist it on in the direction of those vanes, otherwise you'll end up snapping them. So I've started the installation there. I've got the 4 bolts in, they've all got grease on them, just a light covering, and I'm tightening them in a cross pattern just so it goes down evenly. Like I said, there's only the 4 bolts there onto a plastic housing, so don't tighten it too much or you'll crack the housing. Okay, so that completes the replacement of the impeller. Obviously we've got to put it back on the engine, but while we've got it off, we're going to do this sacrificial anode. Boat's not stored in the water, but the kit comes with a new one, so we'll change that as well. Okay, so we've got the new anode. There's the contact face there where it's going to go. We'll give that a clean up so we've got good contact with the anode, and it's secured on with an M10 bolt. Fairly straightforward. So now we're going to do the gearbox oil, and as always, release the top plug before the bottom plug, because if you take this one out and this one's seized, you'll never get the oil in. So I've cracked them both and they're both loose, so we'll remove top and bottom plug. There's a washer there and a washer there as well to change. We'll drain the oil out and then we'll refill, and the lower unit is then done. There we go, I've removed top and bottom plug, and you can see the gearbox oil's coming out. There's no degradation of the oil, there's no water in it, it's pretty good. So I'm pretty confident there's no leaks in there, but we'll still do a pressure test just to make sure. So we'll let that drain out fully first. So we drained the oil out, and now I'm going to perform a gearbox pressure test under vacuum and pressure. I'll just take it to 10 psi on both. That's just going to test the lip seals on the drive shaft and the prop shaft. There's 2 on each, and also the shift shaft. So there we go, that's 10 psi. We'll hold that for a minute or 2 and hopefully it doesn't drop. So we'll come back in about a minute and just see what the needle says. So I've held that for about a minute. We've not dropped at all, so now we'll do vacuum. There's 10 psi into vacuum, and we'll just do the same again. Hold it for 1 minute, and if it holds then we're good. We'll put it all back together and back onto the engine. So the last job now, I've connected up the oil pump to the lower bit here. Got the vent open, and we'll pump oil up until it comes out, and then we'll put the plug in, remove the bottom and put the bottom plug in. So the oil's just started to come out there, and we'll put the top plug in now and then remove the bottom. So I'm going to put it back in the engine now, and I've just put some grease on the spline there. I'll rub that into the splines, and then when we put it in, just make sure that the water pickup tube goes in. This one's fixed firm, so I don't think we've got any issues with alignment on that one. Some of them are loose. This one, really good. It's on a bracket, so we can't misalign it. And then just getting the shift shaft through. We haven't turned the prop shaft, so the drive shaft, so that should align straight away. Then it's just the 4 bolts to go back in and the jam nut. There we go, that one went straight in first time. So you got the dowels that align on both sides. Because nothing changed, nothing moved, it aligned really well. And we've just got to put the shift linkage on the 4 bolts, and that's it. Okay, so that's ready for alignment there. It had popped into gear, but that was my fault. So I pushed it down, it's in neutral now. The shaft spin's free, indicating neutral. The selector's in neutral. We've got the clearance there, which is what we had when we took it off. I'll put 1 bolt in just to close the distance. We'll do this last, because that's where the gear sort of the link's going to be. So we don't want to have a gap there. Secure it, then draw it up, and it pushes it into gear when it's in neutral. So that's the last thing we'll do. But when we're putting them in, we'll just make sure that it's not going to go to one side or anything. It shouldn't do. But so we'll put the 4 bolts in now, and then that'll be it. Like I say, we're going to put some grease on those bolts because we don't want them going in dry. So that's it. The 4 bolts are in, 2 on this side, 2 on the other with grease, and the coupler for the shifter is secure as well. And I'll just test that with the remote, putting it into gear, neutral, reverse, neutral. Testing the shaft as well to make sure that it all works. I've got no reason why to doubt it wouldn't, but it's always good to check now other than once we're back on the water. So we're going to put the prop back on now. I've cleaned up that spline. I'm going to put some grease back on. We'll put the prop back on, castellated nut and the split pin. There's also the washer that goes on, and that'll be that. I've checked the inside there. There's no leaks. We did a pressure test and there's no debris in there, so we're good to go. There we go, castellated nuts on, and I put the split pin in there and bent one of the legs around, so that's not going to come off now. So that concludes the service on the Mariner 15 EFI 4-stroke. I've just done the grease points there, there's a few targeted grease points and a quick check of the engine, everything seems in order. So I hope you've enjoyed that service from Holy Island of Northumberland today. Something different, we don't normally do engines in situ as such, we normally just pick them up and take them back, but due to constraints we had to do it on the island today. But it's been a lovely day, it stopped raining, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So please leave a thumbs up and a like, and subscribe if you haven't already.